I ksaški sem feba na osfed je rastat, for granted, your brain is well protected. It's a zafilter around it called the blood-brain barrier. In English speaker, what control water passage from your bloodstream into your brain, letting through the things you need like oxygen and nutrients while keeping most other things out, including a lot of toxins and even many medications. So here's the surprising part. In 2024, a group of researchers in New Mexico looked closely at brain tissue and they found something inside it that isn't supposed to get through and that didn't even exist until the early 1900s. Plastic, tiny fragments of it. And according to the scientist who led the study, if you added it all up, a single brain might hold roughly the weight of a plastic spoon. That spoon's worth comparison is going to turn out to be the most argued over part of this whole story, and we'll get to whether it's actually true. But first, the simpler question, how does plastic end up inside our brain in the first place? Let's begin with what the researchers actually measured. The study was published in the journal Nature Medicine in early 2025 by a team at the University of New Mexico. They took brain tissue from autopsies and used a technique that heats the tissue until it breaks down, then reads the chemical signature of what comes off. That let them estimate how much plastic was in each sample. In the brains from 2024, they measured about 4,900 micrograms of plastic per gram of tissue. To give you a sense of scale, that's roughly 7 to 30 times more plastic than they found in the same people's livers or kidneys. When the lead researcher scaled that up to the size of a whole adult brain, it came out to around 7 grams, about what a disposable plastic spoon weighs. Or mehr. This enormous spoon figure isn't actually in the study. It's a comparison the scientist offered in interviews to help people picture the number. Keep that in mind because it matters later. There was also a second finding, and in some ways it's the more concerning one. The team compared the 2024 brains with brain samples that had been stored back in 2016. In just 8 years, the amount of plastic had risen by about 50%. And quick thing before we go further, if you're finding this interesting, take a second to subscribe. This channel is all about exactly these kinds of, that can't be right science stories, and it genuinely helps us make more of them. Right, back to the plastic. So how does plastic get inside a person to begin with? It gets in as microscopic particles, the tiny fragments, almost like a fine dust that you can't see, taste, or feel. Here's where they come from. Everything made of plastic slowly sheds bits of itself as it's used and worn down. Food packaging, synthetic clothing, car tires on the road, takeaway containers, even the water bottle in your hand. Over time, those bits break down into small fragments called microplastics and then into even smaller ones called nanoplastics, the particles small enough to end up inside us. We take them in 3 main ways. We eat them in our food, we drink them in our water, and we breathe them in from the air, including the air inside our own homes. And once they're in, they travel. Plastic particles have now been found in blood, in placentas, in the walls of arteries, and in reproductive organs. So the brain is just one more place this shows up, part of a much bigger pattern. Which brings us back to that protective filter, the blood-brain barrier. It's genuinely good at its job for the things it's designed to handle, like bacteria, whole cells, and larger molecules. But the plastic found in the brain wasn't large. Most of it was nano-sized particles just a couple of 100 billionths of a meter across. That's smaller than the wavelength of visible light, which means you couldn't see a single one even under an ordinary microscope. And that may be exactly the problem. A barrier built to stop relatively big things might simply not be equipped to catch something that small. In experiments on mice, scientists have watched inhaled nanoplastics travel up the nerves behind the nose and into the brain directly, skipping the bloodstream altogether. Whether the same thing happens in people hasn't been demonstrated. In fact, the researchers are honest about this. Exactly how these particles reach the brain is still unknown. Now the fair question, is any of this actually harmful? Or is the plastic just sitting there doing nothing? The strongest evidence we have so far doesn't come from the brain, it comes from the heart and arteries. In 2024, a study in the New England Journal of Medicine looked at people who had fatty plaque surgically removed from an artery in the neck. In more than half of them, the surgeons found microplastics in that plaque. And over the following 3 years, the people who had plastic in their arteries were about 4.5 times more likely to have a heart attack or a stroke or to die than the people who didn't. Dat kränkset filias tanageti mit trontiad minikanen. At sirakten as a kränkcell link, but it can't prove the plastic caused those outcomes. People carrying more plastic may also be more exposed to pollution in general, and pollution harms the heart in many ways. So think of it as a strong warning sign, not a final verdict. The brain study raised a similar point about dementia. The brains of people who had dementia contained several times more plastic than the others. It's tempting to conclude that plastic causes dementia, but the researchers specifically warn against that. A brain affected by dementia is more damaged and more leaky, so it would likely collect and hold on to more particles no matter what. In other words, the extra plastic could be a consequence of the disease rather than a cause of it. Which brings us to the biggest question, and the part most of the headlines skipped: is that spoon's worth of plastic actually real? Not long after the study came out, other scientists pushed back, and they pushed back seriously. Their concern comes down to how the plastic was measured. Remember, the method works by burning the tissue and reading the chemicals it gives off. Here's the catch. Your brain is largely made of fat, and when you burn some of those natural brain fats, they produce a chemical signal that looks very similar to polyethylene, the exact type of plastic the study reported the most of. So the critics' argument is fairly simple. The team may have mistaken some of the brain's own fat for plastic, and ended up with a total that's far too high. One researcher pointed out that the reported levels were higher than what you'd expect to find in sewage sludge, which is hard to believe. A formal critique was published in the same journal in late 2025, and a few images in the original paper turned out to be duplicated. The authors corrected them and called it a clerical error, but it added to the doubts. To be fair, the study's authors have a reasonable response. The rise over time showed up across several different types of plastic, including ones that look nothing like fat, and a second laboratory found a similar pattern. That's harder to explain away as a simple mistake. So where does that leave us? Honestly, in two places at once. The basic idea that there's some plastic in the brain is believable, because it fits everything we found elsewhere in the body. But the exact amount, the 7 grams, is genuinely in question, because it depends on a method that critics say can't yet reliably tell plastic apart from fat, and it hasn't been independently confirmed. Both of those things can be true at the same time. So let's separate what's solid from what isn't. What's well supported, plastic particles are now inside the human body, in our blood, our organs, our arteries, and, most likely, our brain tissue. The amount seems to be increasing over time, and the particles are small enough that the body's natural defenses were never built to stop them. But what we honestly don't know yet, exactly how much is in there, exactly how it reaches the brain, and, most importantly, whether, at the levels people actually carry, it's doing any harm. A third of the alarming findings come from animal studies that use doses far higher than anything we'd normally be exposed to. So the truthful answer to "is this hurting me?" is, we don't know yet, and researchers are working hard to find out. If there's one thing worth taking away from all this, it's the bigger picture that the spoon points to. In a little over 100 years, we invented a material the body has no natural way to break down, spread it across the entire planet, and we're now finding it even in places we assumed were sealed off. And we're only just starting to ask what that means for our health. The blood-brain barrier is one of the body's most effective defenses, and plastic is a very recent invention, yet somehow the plastic is getting through. So the next time you drink from a plastic bottle, you won't notice anything, because the particles are far too small to see or feel. But based on what we're learning, some of them may already be reaching places we once believed nothing could. And working out what they do when they get there may turn out to be one of the more important health questions of the next decade. If you enjoy stories where something turns out to be nothing like it first appears, here's one to watch next. Paleontologists in New Mexico dug up a skeleton that looked, in every detail, like a small two-legged dinosaur. Except it wasn't a dinosaur at all. And what it actually turned out to be is one of the strangest things evolution has ever pulled off. That's our video Nature made the same dinosaur twice. Give it a watch, and we'll see you in the next one.